evening. My name is Lisa Kruger, and I have the distinct honor to be the Superintendent of Schools in the West Seneca Central School District. Thank you for being here tonight, and for those that are watching this on live stream or the recording, thank you for tuning in to find out some updates on where we are in the redistricting process. I'm going to start with just a few housekeeping items, an overview, and then I'm going to be introducing my colleague, Tony Day. So as you'll see on the monitors, we have a QR code for you to scan. You're welcome to scan that QR code. It will take you to tonight's presentation. So you'll have the entire slide deck from tonight's presentation. If you want to zoom in on that to be able to further analyze anything that we're sharing with you tonight, you'll have access to that. Throughout the night, we're going to have an opportunity for you to share feedback as well, and we will have another QR code for you to scan where you can share feedback regarding what you're hearing and learning about tonight. So just to get us started, I would like to begin by thanking our redistricting committee. This is a committee of staff, parents, community members, administrators who have volunteered their time. We're meeting on a regular basis from 5 to 7 p.m. and they have committed hours upon hours to help us come up with the best solutions to respond to the challenges that we're facing. And just to recap some of those challenges for those of you who may not have learned of the why behind why we're here today discussing redistricting, we have some elementary schools, particularly Clinton Elementary School, that is over capacity. At Clinton Elementary School, our grades 3, 4, and 5 have class sizes between 26 and 28. And that's inequitable, and it's not ideal for what we want our students to experience. I say it's inequitable because we have other schools that are enjoying much lower class sizes that are averaging between 20 and 22 students in the upper grades. We want to deliver that kind of personalized instruction and educational experience for all students, not just for those students who happen to live in a particular area or happen to attend a particular school. I also want to point out some challenges that we're experiencing at Allendale Elementary. While Allendale has more reasonable class sizes, Allendale has a space and a capacity issue as well. We do not have the space and capacity at Allendale to properly deliver our intervention services to students. So right now at Allendale, we have 4 literacy interventionists packed in a classroom delivering literacy intervention, otherwise known as AIS reading services, delivering those services to small groups of children, about 4 to 6 children, who are our most struggling learners and who are often sometimes highly distractible. So imagine 4 teachers trying to simultaneously teach our neediest students in an intervention setting. We have physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech that do not have adequate services right now. Physical therapy that's occurring in a hallway, and we have interventionists that are working out of what were former storage closets to deliver their interventions. So not ideal instructional spaces. So those 2 elementary schools are problematic, and what is leading us to come up with viable solutions to solve that. At the middle school level, we have a unique situation at West Middle School. West Middle School has reasonable class sizes, but what they're lacking is appropriate instructional spaces for all of our academic areas. All of our world language teachers, so those teachers who teach French and Spanish, are on carts. They travel and rove throughout the building all day long, going classroom to classroom wherever there is a teacher that's on lunch or has their prep period and their planning period. That's where the teacher goes for their French or Spanish class. The same for our health classes. Health classes are also teachers on carts. That may not sound problematic, but when you really think about that, that means that they're unable to use that classroom as an ideal instructional space. They don't have anchor charts and vocabulary on bulletin boards in classrooms. They're limited to whatever supplies and materials they can have on the cart and take with them to the next instructional space. So that's the challenge that we have at West Middle School. So that then embarked us on how is the best way to go about solving this problem. This isn't a new issue that just came up. This is one that's actually been in the works and been studied for more than a year and a half. If you recall, last fall, the Redistricting Committee did propose a plan, and that plan was overwhelmingly rejected by the community. At the time, the Board of Education decided, and I think wisely so, to pause the work of the Redistricting Committee. They had a lot on their plate at the time. We were facing some budgetary challenges, and they were pursuing a search for a new superintendent of schools. So the work of the Redistricting Committee was paused just over a year ago, but it doesn't mean that the problems went away. So this fall, with the leadership and support of Tony Day, who is the Executive Director of the Western New York Education Service Council, we brought back together a redistricting committee to revisit the issues at hand and to begin to explore viable solutions to that. The committee started with brainstorming. What are some options and solutions? And of those brainstorms, they had 8 or 9 different brainstorm solutions. We started to dive into each of those and found that some of them were not viable solutions. They didn't actually solve the problem. In some cases, it would have shifted the problems from Allendale and Clinton to another school, just creating a new problem. So we eliminated some of those potential solutions. What you're going to hear tonight are those that are remaining viable solutions. They make the numbers work. It would result in more equitable class sizes in all of our elementary schools, and it would also result in instructional spaces that are ideal for all of our students. I think the last thing that I'd also like to share is right now, because of our space constraints, our most needy students, our special education students, have really been placed wherever we have nooks and crannies. So our students who are in need of such support that they are in very small class sizes of 6 students or 8 students, they've been placed wherever we have available classrooms in the district. It hasn't been a strategic and a thoughtful plan in what is in the best interest, not only of those students, but also of the school community. We want to make sure that we are not overburdening one particular school by having all of our special education students concentrated there, but being strategic about where we place our programs so that we can best meet the needs of our students. So that's a bit of a background and an overview of what has led us here today, where you're going to hear those plans that are viable solutions that we are considering. We want your feedback at this point. That's why we're holding this community forum. Not one of these plans is the front runner. There's not one plan that we're ready to recommend to the board. All of the plans that you're going to hear about tonight, we're presenting to you so that we can then pause to get your feedback and to help inform our next steps. After Tony shares an overview of the viable plans that we're considering, we will allow opportunity if you have questions along the way. And by questions, I mean you really just want clarity on what does that particular nuance of the plan mean. So we want to get your questions answered. And then, of course, at the end, it will just be an open opportunity if you have opinions that you want to share, feedback that you'd like the redistricting committee to consider. We want to give you that time and space as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Tony Day, who has been facilitating the redistricting committee process, to give you some more detail as to the work that we've been embarking in this year.
Thank you, Dr. Kruger. One of the purposes tonight is to help, whether you're here in person, watching live online, or later on watching a recording of the presentation. We're really, as the person in charge of supporting, facilitating the redistricting committee, part of my job is to gather information and feedback from the public and bring it back to our committee, which meets next on Thursday, March 20th. So during the presentation, there will be another QR code, so we're a little QR code happy, that you can, there's a form where you can put your feedback in online, but I also have paper. If you prefer paper, I can give you a piece of paper and you can leave it with us as you go. I'm just going to, I'm going to leave the paper. I'm going to ask my nice people, Mr. Dalbo and Ms. McCartan, if you would like a paper, and just for some of our friends who are here as members of the redistricting committee, and there are some here, feel free to participate as an individual tonight and offer ideas and feedback based on your individual participation, not just as a committee. And if you choose not to, that's fine as well. Okay, and some people, sorry, we don't have tables up, so you have to kind of write on legs or your partner's back or whatever it might be. So what I would like to hopefully do today, does anybody that has paper would like a pen? We have extra pens. Good. So we would like to begin just to set a stage and set a frame for the process. How is the process working? Where are we in the process? What's left to do? And then we're going to pause and ask for questions, like clarifications. If you have opinions and you want to offer feedback on specific pieces, that way we're going to ask for the end. Let's bring the feedback then. But let's work through it so everybody can understand, and then we'll come through and say, what do you think? Do you have preferences? Do you have things that you're concerned about, things that are strong? So to kind of get started, the Board of Education back in October gave the committee a charge, said, in this work, here's what you have to do. First, you need to bring us 2 to 3 recommended courses of action that meet the priorities and goals that the board has established, and I'll put those up for you in just a second. One of those plans maintains current grade level configurations. Pre-K to 5 schools, 6 to 8 middle schools, 9 to 12 high schools. So we have what we have now, but we might have to tweak lines to try to achieve the goals. So one of the plans that the committee has to recommend has to do that. At least one other plan can recommend different grade level configurations. So when we talk about redistricting versus reconfiguration, redistricting means you keep the same grade level organizations, but you change the lines about who goes to what schools. When you reconfigure, you rethink how you organize students. So instead of having a K-5 elementary, neighborhood K-5 elementaries, you might have one building is a K to 2 and another is a 3 to 5. You might think how you organize the kids differently. That's reconfiguration. And another tool that we offer to the committee is what's called repositioning. Taking a program that operates in one location and transferring it to another location where there might be more space resources available. So those are the pieces that the board is asking us as a committee to try to bring those recommendations, and our target timeline is to bring those recommendations to the board before the end of the school year. All right, and hopefully actually a little bit earlier. There will be no implementation of any decision at the board level for September of 2025. The earliest any implementation would take place is September of 2026. So when you see some of the work tonight, it's aiming at September of 2026, but the final determinant of the timeline is the Board of Education. So these are the outcomes that we've been given from the Board of Education. And on the left side, these are what came out of the committee and have been approved by the board as critical recommendations. First, it really has a lot to do with class size and enrollment. So every classroom should have enough space to allow for strong class sizes. Now, before I get too far, one of the things the charge is create plans that will achieve these goals now, but also have the capacity to achieve them in the future, should there be enrollment changes. So we don't have to do this again in a few years. Because one of the pieces of feedback throughout the early part of the process where we gained feedback is, well, we did this, and then we did this, and when we did this, and then we ended up reversing and going back. And so the charge is, take a look. What would work now, but also what has the capacity to work in the future if things change? So throughout, you'll hear me talking about when we have ideal class sizes, if we had all the teachers we wanted, and also in our current staff. So with our current staff, can it work? But if we had enrollment changes or more staff, would it still work? Because the biggest issue is the fact that in some places, there's not enough places for staff to have the class sizes people want. In some places, some schools, because the way the lines are drawn, have many more kids than they can have, and then some schools could take many more. So that's where we have, is trying to figure out, right now, can we get class sizes that are strong? And when we've talked about class size, we've talked about ideally, regionally, the youngest kids, pre-K to 1 especially, or 2, they usually operate at less than 20 because you're trying to teach kids to crack the code of reading, and that's done in small groups as well as big groups. The more kids you have, the harder it is to get to those small groups. From the intermediate up, the target is 21 to 23. That's ideally where you'd like to be. We've been kind of aiming at the 18 for the primary and 21 for the intermediate, so in case more kids came in, you wouldn't push from 23 to 26. So we've been trying to say, can we do it with what we have now? Can we do it if we had in the future some more staff? One goal is this, so that's kind of this idea of good class sizes, ability to create ideal class sizes in the future, and also to try to balance enrollments. At the elementary level, 4 of the buildings are fairly comparable in size and square footage. Then this building is very different. As the former Allendale Junior High School, now operating as an elementary school, it is much bigger than the other elementary schools. The idea is to try to make sure that the buildings and the enrollments are balanced, proportionate for size. One of the other goals is trying to not have elementary schools that are too big, but that's not written down because it's also part of trying to take advantage of the space that's available. At the elementary level, where Dr. Kruger was talking about interventionists, people working with kids in alternate ways, making sure that they have appropriate teaching spaces. So one other practice that is in play here in the district is at Allendale. All of your elementary schools were built at different times and in different places in different contexts, and they look very different. Their space is set up differently. So if you go to Allendale, most of their spaces are big classroom spaces, like full classroom spaces. They don't have lots of smaller, like half classrooms. You go in this building, there are many places that are like half spaces where you can have a teacher and 5 or 6 kids, and it works really well. Some buildings don't have that. So in part of this process, you can't just say how many kids divided by how many rooms. You have to know how schools operate, what needs to be done in schools, and what spaces are available. So that's why the analysis becomes pretty complicated to make sure. My job is to make sure the district committee doesn't make any recommendations that can't actually happen in reality. The worst thing that could happen is the board adopt a plan, and then when you go to implement it, find out you didn't think it through properly, and you got to undo it. That would be disaster. So we're looking to really make sure at the elementary level that there's appropriate teaching spaces for all people, and we're generally, when you look at especially elementaries, generally you're thinking about 20% of the kids. It's kind of a target for when you do intervention planning in schools. 20% of the kids will need some sort of intervention outside of the regular classroom. And so you work that, and sometimes, usually it's like on an every other day basis, and you take that into account when you're trying to do capacity. At the middle school, one of the goals is to make sure that foreign language teachers can get off carts, and that 15 to 1, which if you're not familiar with it, 15 to 1 means it's a special education setting where one teacher works with up to 15 kids, generally they're academically and standards based, going for a graduation diploma, but they are separate from general education classes. And so right now at West, I believe there are 3 classes. One operates in a full-size classroom, 2 work in smaller size, but there's other sections of 15 to 1 that are popping into an English room because nobody's there. And others go to a math room because nobody's there, as opposed to having a space that's really set up and organized for that. And then finally, this idea of the thoughtful placement of self-contained students. This is the example I would use. At Clinton, there is a 6 to 1 classroom for young kids, K to 1, I believe, right? So 6 to 1 means that these students, because of their needs, need that ratio of kids to adult, which means that these are our youngest, and they also have the highest level of need. The issue, what you would rather not do is have to ask those kids after 2 years, then have to pick up and go to a different school with different related service providers and different special area teachers because there's not a companion 6-to-1, because you can only, these self-contained classes, you can only have a 3-year grade span. So after a student goes K-2, they can't stay there because there's a kindergarten student, you can't have a 4th grade student in with a kindergarten. So now that student has to transfer to some building where there's a 6-to-1 room. And so in this process, do we have enough space to thoughtfully place these self-contained rooms? And I compliment West Seneca on doing this because, there's 13 self-contained classrooms at the elementary level, and at the middle level, I believe there are 10. But what the district is saying is many districts will send students to other places. This district says we want our kids. But the challenge is they create space needs that may not exist in other districts. So that's what our job is to try to manage all that. Along the way, the board asked us also to take a look at these pieces. Try to limit kids having to travel across the district. Like for right now, if you're an English as a new language student in elementary school and you live over by, south of Seneca Mall, where Seneca Mall used to be, you have to go all the way to Northwood to get your ENLs. If you are a self-contained student in 8-to-1 classes at the elementary level, you might have to go from over by French and Transit and come here to this building. So trying to minimize that. Trying to set up boundaries so that kids attend schools that are closer. They're not driving by a school to go to a school, which is the case right now for some Allendale kids. They drive right by Winpot in order to go to Allendale. Trying to take, and you have in the district, you have students that have greater needs in different family situations. And what the research shows is if you put them all in, you tend to concentrate them in one area, that it has a negative impact on expectations and learning, and it improves if you can balance it out. So one of the goals is to try, it's not a primary goal, but if possible, can we also make this so we try to balance out so the kids at most risk are not in one place and the kids with very low risk are in another.
People on the stream can't hear you.
Sorry, people on the stream. Thank you for sending that. Keep sending the feedback. That's good. I'll do better. And the other thing was, if possible, would there be an opportunity to have multiple ENL classrooms for kids? So there's right now, if you're at elementary, you go to Northwood. If you're at middle school, you go to East. If you're at high school, you go to East Senior. Could we create the possibility of the capacity to expand that? So the idea of capacity is really a little bit what I was trying to talk about. You have to know your schools, you have to know what spaces you have to know what's appropriate for some set things and what's inappropriate for others. And so the work of the committee ends up having spreadsheets with many, many columns to take into account all the different factors that you have to take into play. You will not see that because it's too confusing. What we do know is we tell the committee, where is there space that's available? West Elementary, this building, because the board charged us and said, don't worry about administrative offices, do the best thing for kids, and then we'll figure out where to place the administrative offices later. And I think that's the right move. So this building has space available. It's the biggest building. It has space in classrooms that are available, especially if the special education office is moved, and there's smaller spaces that can be taken advantage of. East Middle / Elementary is another source of opportunity. There's administrative offices. There are classrooms, if you've ever walked East Middle, there's some classrooms there's a lot of conference room opportunities at East Middle. There's some storage areas that classrooms are used for. Administrative offices are there. There's extra room there. And then finally, Winchester is the Winchester Elementary on Harlem, where the students went to before the shift over to Winchester Potters. That school is a resource. It's a space resource. Currently, it's occupied by Erie One BOCES, and the plan at some juncture, right now the target is September of 2026, at some juncture, Erie One BOCES is going to move that programming to a new facility out in Depew. And when that happens, Winchester becomes a space opportunity for this process potentially.
When Erie One BOCES moves, does that imply a negative hit to the school revenue?
Yes. So one of the things we've talked at the committee level, the question is, first of all, if when Erie One moves, they won't lease the building, and currently they pay $600,000 a year in rent. So the district will lose $600,000 in revenue. So then what we've talked to the committee about is if you reopen a school, there are some expenses, and I call them sustainable expenses. You have to have them. It isn't just 1 year, you have to have them all the time. If you're going to have a school, by New York State education law, you must have a principal. You have to have a nurse. You have to have clerical support. And so this column is a fairly conservative estimate of the total dollar figure to reopen an additional school. So in combination with the loss of $600,000 in lease revenue, an addition of at least $750,000, to reopen Winchester is a $1.3 million impact on the budget. And that would be, in order to do that, you'd have to make tremendous cuts, or you'd have to go over the tax cap. And that move to try and get a supermajority on your budget vote, which is what it takes, has worked about 5% of the time it's ever been used in New York State. So I've cautioned the committee that we really ought not, unless the Board of Education directs us to, that we ought not use the thought of trying to reopen Winchester as a piece, because fiscally, it could, some of the challenges the district had fiscally back a decade ago would come right back if you tried to do that. Because on top of all the, like right now, the district is looking at, in the current budget, there's always challenges of making the revenues and the expenditures work. This would pile on top sustained expenditures that would require sustained revenues. One of the things that could possibly be considered is if you kind of expand a building to include one grade level. So for instance, you know, if at East Elementary could handle another grade level of kids. So if that became a 5-8 building, which at some point it was in the past, then the impact is less, and it would have to be determined based on, could the school nurse handle it? Would there need to be another administrator? There'd be some conversation, but it probably is fiscally more doable than just opening up a school for lots of kids. And somebody asked us, when we talked with the board, a board member asked, like, how many kids is it? And I said, well, I don't have that exact answer, but it's a point where you put enough kids in there, you can't keep the same infrastructure. Like, it might put kids in jeopardy that you have only one nurse. You might have to add a nurse. Do you need another administrator? Do you have enough teachers to do the things that need to be done? So, and people have been pretty good about it, but this is the QR code. For those of you that are at home, if you scan the QR code, and when we put this PowerPoint out and put it on the web, the link will be live, so when people watch it later, they can watch and they can offer feedback. But right now, does anybody have any other questions about the process at this point?
I just have a Winchester Academy question. Would the district consider another lease option to maintain that revenue?
Well, that's a question, a budget question. I mean, as a former superintendent, we don't want to just have a building, like I would look to try and gain revenue out of it, right? There could be, whom else might want to do something with it? And then the district, also the district, there are other things that the district may look to pursue, things like family support centers, there's different options to support families that require space. So I think it wouldn't just be the door shut and mothballing. How could we use it, or whom might be able to use it, and how? So what is the, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I saw you were defining capacity. So that's a moving target because populations change and needs change, right? So that was built into the what was it, 3 or 4 student buffer you were talking about earlier?
Yeah. So I'm going to show you, when we get to the first option, I'll explain to you, like, we're always saying, what's the max capacity, and then where would we come in? So we have to know what it can hold, maximum, and then when we check out a possible idea, then we have to say, well, what would happen? And we project it for what it would look like in 26, 27, and then I've gone 3 years out. So to try to, and it's not perfect, you can't predict with exact precision, but you can have a pretty good idea. So I'm not going to walk and read this whole thing. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, ma'am.
We missed a first couple of minutes.
That's okay.
Are you going to be changing the boundaries or just,
The boundaries of the school district?
yeah, but not the, like, West Seneca stays West Seneca, like, some of West Seneca goes to Orchard Park, like, you're not changing that?
Only the New York State Commissioner of Education has the authority to change school district boundaries. So the district doesn't have any capacity to say, we're going to take these kids and move them here. You know, or we're going to take those kids and bring them here.
And then I just have one more question. So like my husband and I, we went all through the West Seneca schools. When I was on the east side, and we had grade 7, 8, which was like perfect. What's the research when you put 5th grade with 8th grade, and there's such a, their bodies are changing, their intellectual between 5th and 8th is a huge difference, as opposed to 9 to 12.
Well, you're asking a question that's pretty big, and, honestly, I actually did a study for a district out on the east side of New York State that was wondering, they have 5th grade in elementary, and should it be there? So the short answer is, there's not a lot of conclusive evidence that it really impacts kids negatively. There in New York State, there's probably 40% of 5th grade kids, if I remember correctly, attend school in a 5-8 setting. It's a fairly common configuration. Pardon?
What's the positive aspect?
Well, I'm going to be, not to be rude, but if we do this, then I'm never going to get through. I'd be happy to speak with you afterwards. Are there positives? There's pros and cons, and because that's an individual question you have, how about I talk to you after about it? We'll do it individually, okay? So from our process, here's the end, right? Tentative, start with the end in mind. Tentative implementation September of 2026. The goal from the Board of Education point of view is to try to have at least 1 full year to prepare to do it, to implement, to do it well. So right now, the target for any decision-making would be before the end of this school year. The Board of Education reserves the right to change the marker. That's their prerogative. Our goal is try to bring some recommendations to the board on or about June 1st. So this is not a set-in-stone date. It's just a date to give people a sense of where are we trying to get to. And this meeting would not be a decision-making meeting. It would be an information meeting, going deeply into the recommended, like you'll see some things that are being considered. This would be taking an even deeper dive, spending 45 minutes to an hour to go through all the details and answer all the questions so the board can be armed and now as knowledgeable as they can before they even have to talk about decision-making. The committee's work ends here, and then the board's work takes over from there. So to get to that point, the committee has been working on establishing the priorities. They took a look at, and I thought it was important that a bunch of people spent a lot of time last year working on this, so we spent time looking at their ideas, and then we started to brainstorm. And in the brainstorming, we're trying to figure out what can work and what can't work, and that's pretty much where we are right here. So what's going forward now is getting feedback back to the committee, taking a look at all the plans that have been examined, the ones that could work, and trying to make a determination which ones do we want to go deep on before we make a recommendation. For instance, like one of the options you'll see tonight, could transportation do it? Like, do they have the capacity to get the kids there? What would it require a shift in starting times in order to make it work? Are there enough physical spaces for kids in special areas? What would be the implication? How many staff might have to move? What would be the process for doing it? Those are the nitty-gritty details that you want to be able to answer people's questions. What would be the impact on kids, not only in the classroom during the day, but in terms of outside activities? What would that be? That takes some time to work through that. But that's kind of where we are right here. That's the work of the next, really, 2 months, so that we get closer to this target of, making a decision at the committee level at its May 22nd meeting, and then presentation to the board sometime shortly thereafterwards. So, one of the committee at its January meeting, we had looked at a couple of options prior to that. We looked at one option that was purely redistricting, just changing the lines. which, as somebody, and I'll tell you, when I'll talk to you a little bit about how that works, it's super difficult. I'm going to be honest with you. Within the confines of the structure we have now, it's very difficult to do it. You know, some of it's just by the geographic location of schools. Like in this district, 4 of your elementary schools, 2 of them are a mile apart here, and 2 of them are, you know, a quarter mile apart, like on this campus. That makes trying to draw lines where kids don't have to travel long distances challenging. So, but we explored that option. We explored another option as an example of reconfiguration. And then the committee was put into small groups and asked to brainstorm all sorts of possible options. And at that January meeting, they came up with 8 different options. And I'm not going to read each one to you, because in the end, they only on our committee, we have 34 individuals. So I asked for volunteers, be part of what I call a slice group, a little task force, to examine those options, those ideas, and help determine which ones are viable and which ones are not. So as a result of that meeting, which took place at Clinton Elementary on January 30th, 8 of these ideas were considered, and I did work to show in a very quick sense what the numbers would look like, and then we said, is it even worth exploring? The committee went down and they decided that 2 kind of options were ones that they would want to explore. One option involved establishing a configuration where on both sides of the district you have K-2 buildings and then a 3-5 building. The west side would have 2 because it has more kids. When you go the west of Union Road, there's more kids. And the east side would have Northwood as a K-2, Clinton as a 3-5. Then the kids go to middle school. Now here's where one of the things everybody has to understand. In order to maintain kids at West Middle and East Middle, there's a unique piece in this district. At the secondary level, East Middle School has much more capacity than West. The population is bigger than East, the way the lines are currently drawn. At the high school level, West Senior has more capacity for kids than East Senior. So it's a unique challenge then. So right now, in order to create rooms, West Seneca West Middle School, their class sizes are very close, if not identical, to West Seneca East. They run about 23 and a half in classes. The challenge is that at West Middle, there are 787 kids, and at East Middle, there are 569. And so the only way to create rooms, remember the goal is to create rooms for foreign language teachers, devoted rooms. The only way to do that is somebody that currently goes to West has got to go to East. Because the only way to create rooms is you need fewer students. You have fewer students, so you need fewer teachers that need rooms. That's the rub. So the committee has to start looking at who has to make the shift and how do we make the shift. That's one of the most difficult questions that's out there. So in this option, there were a couple of ideas posed, and the committee's view was, well, maybe they could move for high school and then they could move for middle school and come back for high school. So that was their idea. The other idea was to create 4 K-3 schools and have a district-wide 4th and 5th grade building. So K-3 has 4 neighborhoods, and then 4-5 is a unified school, and then kids go to middle school. The idea being that West has the most space, and you can take advantage of the space. But those were the 2 that really met the mark, and the team said, let's explore those. In the end, at the February meeting, we explored all those options, and we gathered feedback, and nothing definitive came out of that meeting, but as the facilitator checking with Dr. Kruger, it was apparent that option 5 had more support to be explored further, so that's the one we're going to present today. And you'll be able to give your feedback on that, okay? But that's all, because listen, every option, there's somebody that won't like it. right? So, but part of it is to get the feedback so we can take it and help the committee and the board make informed decisions. So I'm going to start with what's called redistricting option 1. And this one says you still have to have 5 K-5 elementary schools. So how do you draw the lines to do that? So this is what was explored. Clinton, right, just so you know, Clinton has 632 kids. In order to stay a K-5 and not have class sizes of 28, there are about 110 kids have to somehow not be going to school at Clinton. And even then, it would be tight. So this is Clinton's attendance zone is here. And so some kids here, now you start to think, where would the kids, are you going to make the kids go from here to here? Well, that doesn't seem to make sense. So there's limited places. So in this version, this part of the Clinton district would go to Northwood. Then this spot right here, which right now is part of Allendale, right? Sorry, at home. The idea was don't make these kids cross through West in order to go to Allendale. So Winpot would absorb some of them and West would absorb some. The other school that has to kind of lose some kids in order, because Allendale right now I think has 520 kids, and Allendale has got to lose some kids. They need 2 more. They've got, for intervention, they're putting 4 interventionists in the same room to do intervention. So if you could, it's very challenging when you're working with 4 or 5 third graders, but there's 3 other groups of 4 or 5 third graders at the same time, all trying to learn and close gaps in reading. It's challenging. So they need at least 2 more spaces to do that. So some kids have to move out. So some of the kids, this part of Allendale would be redistricted to Winpot or Westell, and trying to keep Westell from exceeding 700 students. There were more kids here, so a few kids would cross, make the move and attend Allendale, because the number of kids over here was more than they needed in order to accomplish their goal. So this becomes part of Northwood, this becomes part of Winpot, this becomes part of West, and that becomes part of Allendale. So it actually, and you can see, you can see how many students would be impacted. So if you figure whenever you make the move, in September, kindergartners aren't, they've never been anywhere else, so they don't know. So if you were in kindergarten through 3rd grade, then you're going to be impacted if you have to move. One of the ideas that some districts do is they say, if you're a 5th grade kid, you get to stay and finish if you can get the ride. So that's built in. We also explore the idea about, you start to limit the impact by making the move. Kindergartners come in, let 5th grade stay, and it shrinks the numbers. But there's still kids impacted. There's families that are impacted. At the middle level, there were 2 ideas floated. The first idea, about 150 students that currently attend West Middle have to somehow move and become part of East. So both circles that you see capture about 50 students in each grade. And when you look longitudinally, you look through the years, it does this. It's not the same every year, but it's amazing how close it is every year. So one idea was this area that, it's the south of Cayuga Creek, east of Union Road. The East Middle School campus is right here, so it's there. The rationale, is geographic proximity. It actually used to be part of East until 1995 or something like that. And so that's option A. And then option B, we were at a committee member and some board feedback says, can we think of something other than Union Road? Can we think of a more, north-south? Well, the challenge, of course, is that when you start doing, you got your 2 middle schools are like they're on the same side of the road, right? So how do you, if you do it straight, some school's going to end up being on the other side. You're going to have a school in a place that kids don't live. So we did this is called the northeast, southwest orientation. And, when we get into, when the committee makes final recommendations, they'll get in and tell you exactly where those lines are. But this program, what it does, once you draw the line, it counts the kids, and it tells you how many are there. So these are the two, and it would be this part with the Winchester area that would end up in this model going to east. So in this model, first of all, to what extent it works with our current staff. But the other thing, if there's expansion, then some other significant shifts would have to occur to make it work. So like in class sizes, with our current staff, and way over here, this isn't on the PowerPoint that anybody sees right now online, but it will be tomorrow. If you made these moves with the current staff, you'd have to reallocate the 119 elementary teachers that we currently have. You would have class sizes that would average 21 to 22, which accomplishes the goal. You would also have, this is the total number of rooms available in each space. This is how many you would need. And this column here, that's the cushion. How many how much cushion do you have before you're out of room? But you can see Clinton is out of room. Allendale and Northwood are tight. And one of the things the committee said was, we could do it, but at what are we going to be looking at recreating the same issues how much further down the line? Because if you ever did get expansion of population or you wanted to get to these class sizes, what you then have to start doing is self-contained classes are going to have to be repositioned. Universal pre-K would have to be moved to perhaps another location. So one of the ideas, like the 6-to-1 rooms, there's 3 of them in the district right now, and there may be a need for a 4th in the future. Like they might go to that front wing of East Elementary. But ideally, you don't have kids in those settings in a school where there aren't kids their same age, because you're trying to put them together. So it's not the perfect plan. Also, when you look at these columns, this column shows, and just so you understand it when it goes forward, this is the percentage of kids that receive free and reduced lunch currently in those locations. And this is the percentage that would receive free and reduced lunch in the new configuration. So it's a little bit better, but not markedly so. And at the middle level, regardless of which option, I didn't put them all up there so it wouldn't confuse everybody, but regardless of the option, the numbers play about the same. Your class sizes end up being high 20s to low 23s, which at an intermediate level is, not unexpected. And West Middle can do it, but it's tight. It's tight, but they can do it. So could it work? It could. If there's expansion, there could be some challenges. So just questions about option 1, not whether you like it or not. We'll get to that. But do you have any questions about that? That's the concept, though. You can see you got a shift, and usually when you have this shift, it creates a different shift. One of the goals, from my perspective, is trying to, especially in redistricting, minimize the number of families that are impacted as best you can. I'm sorry, did you have a question, ma'am?
I do have a question about what is the impact on busing and on the fact that we have the early and late start elementary.
So that's when I said the deep dive, I can't bother Jennifer, I don't want to bug her until I have to, right? So I don't want to ever work on every plan. When the committee says, let's look at that one and that one, then we have to sit with Jennifer. The interesting part of this program, it actually will plot the bus runs too, what kids are on what bus runs, so you can start to get a sense of, are you breaking bus runs up to go to places, or are you just pointing a bus run from this place to this place? That's where we have to work with her on that. So I don't have that yet, but we won't recommend a plan until somebody looks at it and Jen says, well, I think we can do that, you know. The challenge is, of course, between now and implementation, things can change. But you have to make your best guess, but it's got to be an informed, I don't want to use guess. You have to make your best decision with the information you have. Any other questions? But that's redistricting. So it's still K-5, still 6-8, still 9-12. Oops, I went the wrong way. So reconfiguration, this one says 4 K-3 buildings and 1 district 4-5. So the question is, how do you create the K-3 buildings? West is out. Oops. So right now you have to remember, this building wouldn't have any K1, 2, 3 kids in it. So you have to be able to move them and place them somewhere. One of the things that the committee had asked is, in option 1, which I forgot to point out, and I will point it out, because if you lived here, right, and you're in 5th grade, you're going here, but some of your friends are going here at that changeover. And so the committee said, well, can we look to try to create options where you wouldn't have that split? That's why you see some of the, when you get to this plan, this is trying to honor a line that would then work at the middle level also, right? Because this line moves enough kids at the middle level to accomplish the middle school goals. You know, some members of the committee didn't like this. They said these kids would have a long ride. I said, yep, but these kids already have a long ride, right? I mean, and they make it somehow. But, you know, I take the feedback, but I just point out that it has happened. But, you know, one of the things that this is one option of doing it. The other option is to organize that northeast, southwest orientation. So with the idea that the line's going to go like this to create the middle school solution, you'd have Clinton. You see that Northwood has to shift this way. Windpot has to shift down because you have to cover the West L area. And Allendale goes here. So I'm going K1, 2, 3, then everybody's coming here. And this is where there's a question of, like, what's the best way to slot kids on transportation, where everybody's got to come from all parts of the district to this building and then back out again. So that's a question. So this, and then at the middle level, it would either be option B or it would be option A. I have looked at this many times. I cannot figure out a different way, a better way. I can't figure out other ways to have students move from west side to east side without having to make them like cross through in order to do it. Because those are the only 2 options that I can see that would accomplish the middle school goals. So we've looked at it and had the conversation. We had people look at it and no one's found a different way to do it. So here's option A, which is this really kind of keeping Northwood Clinton to the east, Allendale, Windpot to the west. Oops. Uh-oh, Rich, I broke it. So, in terms of class size, first of all, you see, in terms of capacity and can it work, there's a lot of green. Green is good. Green A means it accomplishes the goal. So when you look at the class sizes, this is with current staff, all right? And it's within 20.2 to 21.8, and this is a 3-year look. That's not unreasonable. That means some of your K1s can be smaller, a little smaller, and your 2s, 3s might be a little bit bigger. At 4th and 5th grade, without doing anything else, you will eliminate 28 kids in a class. Because all the 4th and 5th grade kids are in one place, all the divisions even. So you put the teachers there, and this is where instantaneously you no longer have 28, you have 23 to 24. And I always say it this way, that is one less small group, and it gives the teacher a better chance to hit those kids in smaller settings for both math and literacy, which is what you want. So Also, at current levels, look at the cushion that's available. There's a number of rooms that are still available to expand and accept more kids. And at West, 41, there's even cushion at West Middle. So it works in terms of class sizes. You look at, here are the 4 elementaries. They're not exactly the same, but they're fairly balanced in terms of total numbers. You would create the rooms you need for foreign language. Intervention would take place, and self-contained would be, Dr. Fowler would have many opportunities to thoughtfully place kids. And this piece, if there was a need to expand, wind pot gets a little tight. But what I tell people is the difference to get from here to here is probably adding 10 to 12 teachers. And quite frankly, that's not going to happen anytime soon. But the capacity's there in case it could. So this plan has it checks a bunch of boxes. Limiting across the district, well, you're making every kid go across the district in a 4-5 model. One of the things that, I got to go back because I forgot. I apologize. This is one of the issues. 880 kids. There's about 800 in those 2 grade levels. There's 880. Now, of those 880, probably about 50 of them would attend class in a self-contained setting. So that's kind of like they wouldn't be part of spacing into general ed settings, but it's a large school. And any use of a model like this would require thoughtful planning about how to create smaller out of bigger. How do we organize where kids are in the building? How do we organize how they transition from 4th to 5th grade? How can we make it a smaller, more relationship-driven environment in a very large building with a lot of kids? I mean, I put that out there because that's a drawback, but it's also, it checks a lot of boxes, and it uses the space without having to open a new school. But that's all part of the, you got to weigh all those things together. I'm going to keep going and then ask for questions on both of them, either of them. In this model, you get a bunch of boxes. It's still pretty strong. Here you can see the class sizes are still pretty strong. When you can see them, they get chopped off. But like in the first year, you have a range from 20.5 to 21.9, and it's within a student per class. That's not bad. Going forward, there's a lot of cushion again. West is still big. West, in a 4-5, West always going to have 888 because every kid's going there. You get all the spaces you need. You have the same cushion for West. Some of it, when you look at the map, you don't have these, remember these long drives? This one still exists, but generally kids are a little tighter. It offers the opportunity to put pre-K in every building, rather than, right now there's 2 in Northwood, 2 in Windpot. Every building can have K, and if you wanted to, you could expand it. The concentration of high-risk kids, this is incorrect. I'll fix it before tomorrow, but Northwood actually becomes 46% poverty in this. Because when Northwood goes and you add this area, these areas, that creates a higher concentration. Some of the benefits numbers-wise, in this setting, Northwood would have to have more support because the kids would probably need more support in that work. And then could you have E&L in multiple places? Absolutely. Special ed could be done well. If you ever had to expand, Northwood gets potentially a little bit tight and Windpot, but that's a ways off. So those, and then at the middle level, at the middle level, this first option has because of this build, keeps this group at East, and in this model, these kids go to East to maintain this orientation. That make sense? So I speak fast, and let me pause. Do you have questions or thought, or any questions? I need clarification on things, because we're getting pretty close where you can start talking about, like, what do you think, right? And you can offer some ideas.
I don't know if this is an appropriate question. So we're talking this being a large school, like 4 or 5, we're talking 888, I think I saw the number. What's the implication on, like, so I'd imagine you'd need an additional set of administrators.
There would have to be, you would need at least some assistant principal.
Okay, yeah, that's what.
So one of the questions asked, can it handle all the kids? Oh, sorry. One of the questions is, can it handle all the kids? And I believe it can be done. It would be a challenge. I always butter up Dr. Frawley at this point, but, I believe, because I've walked the building, I've looked at all the spaces. It could be done. It would be a challenge. The conversion of the pool to a gym space to create a second phys ed area, very helpful in this. Multiple art rooms in place, very helpful in this. Cafeteria is a challenge, but there's some other places that could be used if you needed to. Would it be challenging? Yes, right? But could it happen? Yes. One other thing, one option, the committee had some conversation about the hybrid. A had the Northwood and Clinton with this, and the B had this with these kids going to East. The committee started talking about, could there be a hybrid of it? These neighborhood elementaries go to a district middle school, and they go to this feeder pattern for secondary. So the idea being that once you move from here to here, you're not neighborhood attached anymore, and that you could split to a different pattern for secondary. So I haven't run the numbers would be very similar to what you're seeing. So going forward, the committee, there's some questions I want the committee to really take on and have some discussion around. Before we talk about all different possible other options, some things have to be really talked about. So what's the best way, committee, to achieve the middle school goals? What kids get redistricted? What families get redistricted? Let's talk about the pros and cons of options, and because that's a question. If you're going to achieve the middle school goals, West Middle can't get what it needs to do without some students moving and attending. I'm going to jump down. The third bullet, should we allow phase-in periods? Like at the middle level, there's ways to do it where anybody that starts middle school gets to finish middle school. And then you start, one year you have the new 6th grade kids, the next year would be 6 and 7. And it'd be a 3-year phase-in, and those kids wouldn't even impact the high school levels till, if you think about it, there's a year next year, 6, 7, 8, it would be 5 years before that move would happen at the high school level. There are challenges. Every time you try to do that, every time you have to redistrict kids, there's a chance to screw it up. And then the idea is, can transportation move this student here, but the student next door here? Can they do that? That's a question. The idea is also you could have, if my 6th grader goes here, I could have all my kids, I could send them all there because I want my kids in the same school. If they had an 8th grade brother, families could do that. But that's a question. I just know administratively, it creates that every year you got to rethink your transportation lines. Every year you have to decide, you have to think, well, how many teachers have to go this year as we move? And every time you do that, you come up with chances to make mistakes. Because despite the great work and best efforts of people, this is highly detailed work that could be problematic. So part of the committee is like, do it. And then there's others that say phase it in. That's a question. And you can, these are some of the things you can offer your ideas in a minute. Should this idea in one plan where kids go to middle school and then back, should that be something that even be considered? And then the committee, at the end, there was a move to begin to think about putting the one high school idea back and study that. There was a sense that last year the idea was explored, but never deeply. In terms of, there's a lot of feedback, and there was a lot of pushback with a lot of questions. And I said, my response was, if you want to be able to do that, the starting point is to take that feedback and know what the objections and questions are and start having the answers, which to the committee's credit last year, they never got a chance to do that. The process was paused before that could happen. But you can see numbers-wise, the idea is that you have 5 K-4 buildings, and you can see the class sizes that exist. And even with current staff, anytime you start to create economy of scale, you create more. The game really occurs when you start putting the kids into 2 5-7 buildings, because now 5th and 6th grade, which are taught by people that can teach one classroom, you start to create much more even staffing lines, and you can see what the numbers, but even here, this is the issue. West still has 800 kids, and you really got to get them down to 650. So even in this, somebody would have to make a shift, and then the idea would be having an 8-9 building at East, and a 10-12 building at West. East, I didn't show you everything, but East would end up having about 875 kids every year. I think every grade level is 430 kids. Current kindergarten is 413, and there might be a little trend to that, but think 430 and multiply the number of grade levels. So can East, right now East has 600 or so. Could they handle 875? East High School had 1,000 10 years ago. So I believe there's capacity there. Could West Senior host 1,329 kids? Don't go back too far, and they did have 1,329 kids. The questions are, there's a little bit, programmatically the demands on schools in 2025 are not the same as they were in 2015. More intervention, English as new language instruction, more social and emotional supports, so that would have to be studied. The question is, what would be the impact on students and families in doing it? So some of it is when you do this, especially down here, it's not about everybody's going to the same places. So it's not about East versus West. It kind of balances and makes a more consistent student experience, and kids have access to everything. So there's not just, this school has these programs and this has this. So it's not educational lottery based on where you live. It creates consistency of opportunity. When you move to a one high school, now, in some ways, athletically, especially at modified or JV, you create teams that have the capacity to have more kids and more stable settings as opposed to combining. And you might have actually more opportunities for kids. At the varsity level, quite frankly, there's going to be one quarterback, and there's going to be, one pitcher, and there's going to be a small, at the musical level, could you have 2 musicals? Sure. But in some ways there's wins, and in some ways there's challenges. So that's a question that the team, do you really want to take a look and do the work to kind of play that out?
Just add something that I'd like to share with the committee,
Please
please,
do.
Tony.
As you give your feedback, whether it's verbally, whether it's on paper, for those that are watching the live stream and accessing the QR code, I think something that would be critically important for us to get feedback on, and you're seeing some themes in these different options, is your feedback regarding the number of transitions that our students go through. We currently have what I'll call 3 levels: elementary, K-5, middle school 6 through 8, high school 9 through 12. That's 3 different levels, and our students go through 3 transitions. In some of the options that we're exploring, it would introduce another level, another transition, whether it's what Tony just revealed with the concept of a junior high, senior high, or the prior option that he described where this building, West Elementary, becomes a grade 4-5 building. That's inserting another level for our students, and that is another transition for students. That's a reality of it. So if you have strong opinions or feedback related to that and the number of levels, the number of transitions that students go through, that would be, I think, important for us to know, and we can take that back to the committee. So that's just one point that I wanted to share with you. I think some of the other priorities, our board really articulated the charge well. We want to be sensitive to what does this mean for class sizes? What does this mean for the time that a student is on a school bus? Are they attending their neighborhood school? But if you have any feedback regarding that, certainly you're going to be given that opportunity either verbally tonight if you want to share it publicly or through the avenues that we're providing for you so that you can more privately share that feedback with us and with the committee.
So I'm going to close by telling you that, my job is not to make a decision or have a favorite. My job is to make sure we explore all the angles and we try to make sure everybody's voice gets to the table. I think like these 3 ideas, they all have there's some great pieces to them and there's drawbacks. There's not any perfect plan, but what the committee and the board would really value from is thoughtful feedback, like what do you think? So I would like to offer, you can write it on the paper and leave it on the table in the back, but we also want to offer an opportunity. If you'd like to state a position or some ideas that you'd like the committee to hear or the board to hear, because there's members of both here with us tonight, then I would invite you to step to the podium, just because what I've learned is people only can't hear you unless you're speaking into the microphone. So is there anybody that would like to offer any ideas, or like thoughts about the process, thoughts about some of the options, or are we, but whatever you'd like to do. So I'll leave that to you, or we can just bring the mic to you and you don't have to stand up, but I can bring the mic to you and you can just talk from your seat. Pardon?
I can do the mic.
Or, well, first we need somebody that wants it. Go ahead.
I guess my biggest question regarding the 4-5 school, how would busing even be an option? This district is huge, and we already have huge busing issues. This building, buses don't get here, and the latest is 4:15, 4:30. That's an hour after the school day. There's no way this district will be able to handle that. Have we thought of the emotional support the kids will need switching schools again? I do believe another switch would be big. And then what else do I have? Again, with the 4-5, I think kids need to be with their siblings, so that will take them away from their siblings. I know Lancaster does this, and I talked to some parents, and they do not like it.
Okay. And just so you know, like transportation, we haven't done transportation yet. That's a great, valid point. And the rest of your points, I thank you and offer. There's lots of perspectives.
And do we know what the cost will be for do we have any idea what the cost would be for any of these?
So if I can respond to some of the first questions that you posed, because I think that this is critically important as to why we're not looking to implement a change this September, the September of 25. We would have a full year to be able to support our families with transition. Because once a plan is decided, there is naturally going to be an emotional reaction to that. There's naturally going to be some grieving if you're now wrestling with the fact that you're going to be changing schools. We want to help support families through that. With the time that we're going to have, that will allow us to be really thoughtful and purposeful about our transition planning, whether that's open houses and scavenger hunts and things so that we can support our students through that transition. But all of the things that you're pointing out, if some of these options, if the feedback is overwhelming, that the community is not interested in us exploring this building as a 4-5 building, then we won't even have to go any further with looking at the viability of transportation. So as Tony said earlier, we are starting here with gathering feedback to help us narrow the scope and then do the deeper dive on what are the implications logistically. If there are financial implications to that, that would then come during that work.
Your questions are good, and all those questions, like, we need to know what's the financial implication, I'll be right with you, what's the personnel implication, and how are we going to support? All that,
My other question is, so I'm the PTA president here, and I'm actually, my son's going to middle school next year, so this actually is not affecting me with
Yeah, I
my
got it.
kid. But what would a PTA, a 4 or 5 PTA look like? Because in the middle school, they're non-existing. Like, I have been the president at the middle school, I'm currently West Senior's president. There really is not a parent involvement. I think I've seen a trend where parents aren't as involved, but they are when they're a little bit younger. But if they have a 4 or 5 building, I feel like they're gonna not even have involvement. And it's sad for them, because they're still elementary school kids.
yeah, I don't know.
That's like another.
Right, it's something for us to consider. Yeah, I get it. Thank you.
People are gonna fundraise for 4 or 5. They won't fundraise for middle school, very minimum compared to what we get now.
Yeah,
When you can do an Apex run and raise $40,000,
yeah.
you're not gonna get that.
Yeah, I mean, that was similar in my experience, that elementary, in the middle, the move to middle, things shifted and participation dropped.
Payments will just be the same, so that makes, that's sad.
Okay, but that's a good point, and, it's noted. I don't really have a response to it, other than we're listening, and those are all part of, we have to try to dig deeper, and that's why your feedback's important. Like, if that option, reconfiguration option was said, let's go down further with it, we'd have to, somebody have to do some research on that, and go to places that have 4 or 5 buildings and find out how does it work and can it work, and try to have a response to that.
Because I have talked, reached out
Sure.
to them, and they are not happy.
I talk like loud.
Yeah, but people at home can't hear you without the mic, though.
So when we bought our house on Tree Haven in 1994, wherever, they had just redistricted. We didn't even know. We thought we were going to be east, but we were west. My son went to Clinton. He was third grade. And then there was I think this was a K through 2 building. And, Potter Road. So, I mean, we didn't think twice about, our kids being at different schools, because we knew they were with the littles, and then he was with the next group up. And then also the seniors, when they did that switchover, they kept busing, they didn't make them switch, they just kept the busing going. And, I mean, it all seemed to work out. I mean, we didn't even think twice about it back then. So, I don't know if that.
Thanks. No, that's
So-
perspective, from someone that went through the processes, earlier processes. And
Yeah, I mean, we've watched it evolve. I mean, when we both grew up and went to West Seneca, and we've watched it evolve.
Property line was always Union Road.
Yeah, so,
thank you.
okay.
So if you're the kids are perfectly fine for the transferring, it's mostly just the parents that are worried about it, because I went from Northwood to Winchester Potters to West Middle, and the Winchester to Winchester Potters to West Middle was all in 3 years, and I was perfectly fine. All my friends were fine. It was just the parents being worried about it.
My answer throughout 30-some years in education is that kids are pretty resilient. Thank you for offering, that was a great point, thank you.
Hi, everybody. Just as kind of a point of clarification, having been in the district for my entire life and a former administrator in the district, back right after redistricting plus 1 year, when Pam had mentioned that kids were all over the place, there were 160 kindergarten kids at Northwood and primarily West Elementary. And over that 25-year period of time, the district has taken a Band-Aid approach to redistricting. And this is a heavy lift for the board, for Dr. Kruger, Mr. Day, and the reconfiguration committee. And they're looking at things from a 30,000-foot view with a primary focus of what is best for kids. and this young lady in front of me said it right. And kids are resilient, and they will take the temperature of the adults in the room, and that's what they'll mirror. With adequate planning, and we're a year, 15 months out from any type of implementation, there is ample time to make those transition about scavenger hunts or tours or visitations, and having peer mentor programs. We know that works fabulously at both East and West middle and high schools. And so I think that the team, board, superintendent, and committee should really be commended for taking not just a thoughtful approach to this, but a public, open, transparent approach to that, because in the past 25 years, that was not typically the case. And so whatever hard decisions need to be made, if they stay centered on kids, it's going to be a win for the community, it's going to be a win for students, and a win for achievement. So whatever the decision is, you should be commended for taking these very important steps. And I think most kids, most parents will understand it once it's explained to them. So thank you for taking that approach.
Thank you. Anybody else would like to speak? Thank you, Mr. Dalbo, for
Thank you.
being the host with most.
This was sort of already touched on, but if we're looking at making changes that create schools that don't already exist, a 4-5, a single junior high, it sounds like we haven't gotten to a point yet where we would look at other districts that have a similar configuration to sort of learn pros and cons. If they made that shift, how is it handled? Lancaster was mentioned, but I have to think there are others.
Yeah. Oh,
If you'd like. I actually taught in the Lancaster School District at Hillview Elementary at the time when the William Street School was built. That was built due to the growth and expansion there, and it initially was a 4-5 building. So I had a firsthand seat and view at the table of what that experience was like. And it's not without challenges. When you're in a building for only 2 years, there is always a grade level coming and going. And I think that is important for us to consider, of all of the pros and cons of options, and there will be pros and cons to every option. If there was a perfect solution, we would just present that perfect solution to you. So in your feedback, if that is something that is on your heart and on your mind, please express that. But certainly our colleagues in Lancaster would be a great resource for us. That building is no longer a 4-5 building because they've continued to expand. It's now a 4-5-6 building, and they've put an addition onto it. But we would certainly look to colleagues similarly if we're going to have a primary school or multiple primary schools that are pre-K to 2 or pre-K to 3 buildings. We would likewise want to know, is there anything that we can learn in setting up a particular school to best meet the needs of that population?
I would add as an aside, as part of the work that I did with the Glens Falls District, I did also in my prior work as superintendent, assistant superintendent, and a middle school principal, I've spent a lot of time looking at configuration. What I know is there is little conclusive evidence for any one configuration. The only one that has some correlation is a K to 8. K to 8 because with the idea being that it's 9 years in the same place and everybody gets to know the kids really well. But the other ones, in some places, a configuration depends who you speak to, and you can have like a 5-8 building in one district could be the knock them out of the world building. In another district, it might not be. And so there's a lot of factors that determine whether or not a school is high quality of experience for kids and effective. But we would definitely look into it and see what are the pros and cons, of anything. That's part of the work digging in.
And I think, sorry.
It's hard, isn't it?
The question is coming from, I can share my opinion. As a parent, I would like no change. That's like the emotional feeling, right? I want things to stay the same. My kids change a lot as it is, just in like day-to-day life and what they'll eat for dinner one day to the next. So my preference would be no change. If there has to be a change, it would be helpful to be able to envision down the road, how does this impact my child and what are the benefits for my child as well as the community as a whole?
I think that what your point, I think in any look, what are the advantages and potential drawbacks of any configuration? And try to be thoughtful and try to be exhaustive to try and understand it all and provide the very best information you can to the community and to the people ultimately that will make the decision, which is the board. But, I think you were up, your perspective is dead on. I think every parent in the world would agree with you. Like, it's easier for no change. It's easier emotionally for my kids. It's easier emotionally for me. But if it has to be done, then let's try to have as much information as possible. And I think that's a great perspective. And I think the committee is not lost on that. And if not, it's my job to make sure they stay centered on that.
I just wanted to, I agree with you. Like, that's what I'm here for as well. Like, the less change my kids go through in general, I think is better. I do think, though, that if we're going to need change. But I think if they're able to maintain their current social relationships with their friends, I think it makes it easier, and I'm much more willing to accept that. So,
great. Thank you very much.
With a move to a one high school model, if that becomes the plan, what services would be put in place to make the two upper grades who are going to pay the price the most of moving at the very tail end of their high school careers, at the moment where they're making college choices or career choices and all those things, what would be the services you think would be doable for that?
I mean, that's a great question, and that has to be addressed. Like, because how does that, because, like at the very end, it's not the kids, it's the kids, it's the 10th and 11th grade kids at East, right? They're the one. The West kids are going to be remaining in place. But even then, when you add that many more kids, it will change the experience for all kids. So, 10th and 11th and 12th grade kids at West will have a different experience because now there's another 150 kids in their grade level with them. So I don't have an answer for you, but that's definitely, someone's got to consider what's that going to look like and how will the experience, how do you anticipate the experience will shift for the better and for the detriment, and how can you overcome it? So I can't answer your question, but in order to bring that forward, that's the kind of question that has to be really looked at and with the best answer that they can offer based on information that they glean. But thank you for raising it. It's a good point.
So I would say, just thinking very objectively, because a lot of those maps do have my child moving, I would want to see a world where the year prior, we're making sure that the schools have similar building cultures. So my daughter is at Winchester Potters. They're very strong in PBIS and responsive classroom. I don't know if that's across the whole district. Like, she felt like she was being bullied. Her teacher did a classroom circle. So I think that making sure if kids are moving to different places, that they're moving somewhere that the culture is still familiar, the behavioral expectations are familiar.
That's a really good point. And, as a former superintendent, I tell you that we want every school, you'll never have exactly the same because there's different people and different leadership, but I used to call it centralized decentralization. It doesn't matter what school you go to, there should be a core experience that's similar with variation based on individual needs and different things. But I think that's a very good point, and I think regardless of redistricting, that's always a goal of the leadership of the school district, is to try and eliminate what I used to call, geographical lottery. Like, where you live determined what kind of experience you had. So that's a very good point. And it's even more heightened when kids have to move from one to another. And that's like, because that's like, we always worry about kids that transfer in. They do it, listen, it's happening every day, right? Some student comes from another district and they're transferring in. How do we help support them? But now the question is, how do we support a bunch of kids happening all at once?
We're getting to that point where questions and comments are coming to a close. I would just offer that Tony and I will make ourselves available after we formally conclude if there was anything that you didn't want to ask publicly. In addition, through either the QR code or through the paper that was distributed here. Again, if you have feedback that wasn't shared publicly, by all means, this is your opportunity. This feedback will be taken under advisement by me. It will be shared with our Board of Education, and most importantly, it will be shared shared with the redistricting committee so that it will help to guide and inform our next steps. I am grateful and appreciative for your attendance tonight, for sharing of your perspectives. We will continue to operate as we have, and thank you, Bob, for pointing that out. Our goal and mission has been to be very transparent about this. There's not a couple people in a room making a decision. So whether it's good, bad, or otherwise, feedback we want, and we want it now, because that will help to guide our next steps. We will be sharing this recording, live stream recording that we made tonight. We'll be sharing that on our website as we have. Also, the handouts that we had tonight, or rather the PowerPoint presentation, will be made available. All of the redistricting committee's work, meeting minutes, meeting agendas, all of the handouts and resources for all of our meetings can be found on our website, and we will continue to keep that up to date throughout the process. So thank you again for your participation and attention tonight. Have a great night.